Hello and welcome back to DCD Talks. My name is Zoe Turner and I'm a digital portfolio lead for DCD. And today we are going to be talking about preparing power infrastructure for the future of data demand. Now, this is such a timely topic and so important to discuss currently as well. And I'm so very pleased to be working with Nedra Hurley from Southwire today. So Nedra, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Zoe, for having me.
Now, to kick off, can you tell us more about yourself, your current role with Southwire as well, and maybe a little bit more about the topic that we'll be covering today?
Yeah, I would love to. So just to level set, I get asked a lot about my background, and I grew up in this industry, so I'm super passionate about electricity. My father was an electrician, and he worked at many power plants when I was younger. So to become an electrical engineer, it just made sense for me. I will say I have 25 years experience. I worked at a large global company before I came to Southwire 7 months ago. And in that space, I worked all throughout the utility ecosystem, starting in generation all the way through transmission and distribution. So I have a breadth of knowledge and understanding customer pain points and what it takes to build solutions that are truly successful. So with that, I joined Southwire about 7 months ago as the Senior Vice President of Business Development. And what excites me most is they brought me in to understand the markets and where growth is really happening, to help us understand what that means to be strategic and strategize with solutions that help the utility industry and also the data center industry. So to your point, this podcast, I think, is an awesome time. There's a lot going on in the data center space, and I think it's very timely that we're having this discussion.
Absolutely. Well, getting into it. Now, the first thing that comes to mind that I have to ask you about, Nedra, is as data center energy demands are just projected to grow dramatically, I think, until 2030, what do you see as the biggest bottleneck in particular for facing power infrastructure today?
So let me start with a couple stats. So you mentioned that there's a major growth going on, right? So not sure how many folks know this, but by 2030, there's 175% growth that's supposed to happen. And with that growth, over 15 gigawatts a year is missing from the grid to support this. So what does that mean? To your question, we have a power mismatch. We don't have enough power to actually generate what's required for all these data centers that are coming online. And when you think about that, it's not just the power. Once you get the power, then it's the transmission lines, right? And, when you get to the transmission lines, then it's the substation, then it's the distribution system. So it's the whole ecosystem across the board that's really a bottleneck, in my opinion. And not only that, you also have to think about the labor that's required, right? The massive growth that's happening is putting a huge demand not only on the utilities, but obviously for, skilled labor. They're also being asked to, work alongside the data center folks, and then also the utilities. So we're almost pulling from the same pool, and there's not enough folks to go around.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and kind of staggering statistics as well there. I mean, what would you say are the biggest operational or scalability issues as well that are kind of caused by aging grid systems today?
So Zoe, I don't know if you know this or not, but most of the US utility grid was built probably 50 to 70 years ago, right? So it's older than me and you. I'm guessing you're younger than me. So a lot of this stuff has been out there for 30 or 40 years. So, I like to think of it like this. You buy an old house, right? And you want to put in all these smart features and add new rooms and new bathrooms. What happens? You got to redo the plumbing. You got to redo the electrical system. And that's what's going on right now. We're trying to add this massive amount of power and data center demand, and we just don't have the ability. The grid is old. It's aged. We haven't properly updated it in the years. And so right now we're kind of at this standstill of we need to do a lot of upgrades, and then we also need to put brand new equipment on. So there's a lot going on in the background.
That absolutely makes sense. I mean, in all of this as well, how important is, as you mentioned, utilities, how important is that early coordination with those utilities and between them and digital infrastructure operators, particularly in avoiding those projected bottlenecks?
So it's super important. Being proactive, I could sit here and talk about as a manufacturer, giving us forecast and giving us pipeline and planning for capacity. That's really important. But more important than that, I'm going to geek out for you for just a moment, is the load profiles. I'm not sure how many folks realize this, but when you think about the AI training data centers that are really requiring a lot of this load, right? A lot of this power, they don't operate the same way as a normal cloud data center. Cloud is storage. It's kind of like a normal industrial load. It's constant. You know what it takes, right? AI training, that's different. And if I can use my hands here just to show you, it's kind of like a sawtooth load. So when you think about it, like the analogy I like to give is think about the grid normally operating like your car on cruise control. You set it and you go. You don't worry about it, right? Well, now AI comes along and what is that doing? That's like pushing the gas pedal all the way to the throttle for like 2 or 3 seconds and then backing off and then doing it again and then backing off. So if you can imagine, we just talked about an aging grid, right? Like it's been around for 50 or 60 years and you're putting that type of stress onto a grid. So I think the key thing here is for data centers and grid operators to really square away what the load profile is going to be needed so that they can make for sure that the generation needs, the transmission, and everything syncs up. Elsewise, we're going to have major challenges moving forward.
That is such a good point to raise as well, and something I think we'll definitely be taking a look at for the future. Now, something else we do need to touch on when we talk about kind of power infrastructure is this aspect of renewable energy as well. Now, how would you say renewable energy integration and even smart grid technologies as well are changing the way power is managed across different facilities?
So renewables are great, right? They're sustainable. They're what we need. I would just say that we also need a diverse mix of generation. And I would say that because renewables are intermittent, right? So we all know that when the sun's not shining or when the wind's not blowing, you don't have generation. So what you have to do is you have to pair those with battery energy storage. And there's a lot right now going on in that space to make for sure that any renewable operator has battery energy storage attached to it. And that's critically important. The other tidbit about renewables is they operate differently. So I was just talking about the load profile for an AI training facility, right? Well, when you think about the grid, renewables are heavy power electronics based equipment, inverter based equipment, right? That load profile that it generates from electrical output is different than normal rotating mass when you think about a generator or a turbine at a normal power plant. So that, in effect, will put extra stress onto the grid. It'll cause things like power harmonics and other stuff that we haven't normally seen in the past. And so the grid is again being stressed in a way that we've never had to accommodate. So there's a lot of other challenges that are going on when you think about adding renewables on the grid. But the good thing is renewables are actually probably better equipped to being fine-tuned. If you can put automation with it and pair automation, it actually would probably pair well to the needs of a lot of the data center space.
That is really interesting to know. Now, sorry, there's 1,001 questions I could ask on this as well that come to mind. But the first one that comes up as well is the role of, what would you say is the kind of role of modular and smart grid technologies, particularly when it comes to future deployments? Because there's a lot of constraints for, obviously, the deployments of today. But as we've seen over the course of the 50 years of that grid infrastructure as well, things have changed dramatically and they will continue to change. So what would you say are kind of the roles of modular and smart grid technologies for the next stage of deployments?
I think they're critical. They're super important. We're seeing a lot of that in our space. Modularity, we talked about early on the bottlenecks in the grid, and I talked about labor shortages, right? I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but another stat in the United States, we have a labor shortage of electricians, almost 80,000 a year that we're going to need that we don't have. So when you think about modularity and prefabricated solutions, like from my space, prefabricated cables, you think about what does that do in the field? It allows you to quickly terminate one end to the other. So therefore you don't have to have as much labor. You can also troubleshoot easier. You can field test back in the factory and not worry about doing it out in the field. So I think modularity, prefabricated solutions, it's the way of the future. We have to do it. It's a no-brainer. And then smart technologies, I think we only continue to build on that, right? Like it's required. The grid is so dated that we need those smart technologies to help move us forward.
That makes so much sense. I mean, are there any other innovations that you would want to highlight that you think will most shape the future of energy infrastructure as well, and kind of this digital economy?
If I had to sum up based on the different segments, I would say for the grid in particular, you already mentioned it. We need smart technologies. In my previous life, we talk about smart substations, like being able to figure out where's the energy flowing? How can we put it in a different direction? How can we better control it, be more proactive versus reactive, right? I would also say with the grid, we talked a lot about transmission and how dated the system is. We're talking about advanced conductors. That's a huge discussion point right now that I think has a lot of potential. If I pivot and I move over to the data center side, I would say what I'm seeing there and what's so exciting, which I love about innovation and these data center hyperscalers that have a lot of funding, right, is they're really pushing the technology of the future. And, this whole idea of 800 volt DC, I really think that's going to take off. And I think there's a huge play there that we're just starting to untap and understand. And then, as you mentioned, in the OEM space, when you think about vendors and suppliers, it's just figuring out how you can be modular, how you can, do things back in the factory that can eliminate the stress in the field.
That is fantastic. I think, as you mentioned, 800 volts as well certainly is pricked up, but that's something we'll definitely have to look out for the future. Well, Nedra, thank you so much for taking the time. Now, I have to ask, our audience, obviously want to know your final thoughts. What should they really take away from this discussion as well? What should maybe they be asking themselves for the future as well? And of course, how do they get to work with Southwire?
Sure. Well, I would say the first takeaway, as I entered into this space 7 months ago, learning more about the data center, there was a lot of folks asking, is this a bubble? I would say, no, it's not a bubble, right? So what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast here, the demand is real. So that's the first takeaway. This is real and it's happening. It's just a matter of how fast can it happen, as we talked about with the grid and the current constraints that we have. I would say the other two major takeaways, and I've heard these words used, they're buzzwords that have been used for many years, my whole 25 years, but they're so important and I can't emphasize them enough. Partnerships and collaboration. Those who learn how to partner and collaborate and get together sooner, be more proactive, I think are going to end up being the winners. So we would love to hear from you. If you would like to reach out, you've got questions, please feel free to.
Wonderful. Well, Nedra, this has been so insightful. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And hopefully we have you on again soon to discuss further and see how it all pans out.
Thank you, Zoe.
And to our audience who are watching at home, at work, or on your commute, thank you as well for joining us today on DCD Talks. If you have any questions, as Nedra said, do not hesitate to get in touch with the Southwire team. I'm sure they would be happy to discuss further. Otherwise, join us again next time on DCD Talks, and see you then.